Hi guys, this then is the first of many videos to come in terms of looking at a poem by poem, okay? Now remembering that you do have about 16 poems for the exam to prepare for, and obviously you all now have this revision booklet, okay, to work through each poem, and I'm going to be posting videos to accompany the revision sheet, okay, poem by poem. So today we're going to look at the poem There's a Certain Slant of Light. So if you've got your Dickinson book to hand, if you turn to page 12 and read with me, okay, and then we'll have a little sort of revision summary of the poem. Okay, now just to add an element of challenge, I want to try and do this in 5 minutes. So we've got my egg timer here. I'm try and make this a 5-minute, okay, all together with the reading of the poem and then a short summary. Okay, so let's set this. Okay, we've got that at 5 minutes. We'll see how we go. Okay, so this is the poem number 258. There's a certain slant of light. Okay, there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any, 'tis the sealed despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. Okay, so just to remember, this is a poem then where the speaker is observing this certain slant of light on a winter afternoon, and the light is described in some interesting ways, some surprising ways. In one way oppressive, but in one way a sort of kind of a spiritual way also. So if we look at our revision pack here, possible themes then where this poem might be appropriate to talk about would be hope, heaven, mystery, nature, and possibly pain. And it's a really good idea to actually start generating lists like this for each poem, so you can predict if you had a question, for example, on the topic of mystery. You could think, okay, this poem might be interesting to refer to. Okay, so if we look at some of the interesting language points, what you'll see that I've done in your pack is actually pull out certain quotations that it might be interesting to talk about, okay? And you'll see how this list corresponds with the 3 strands of the exam questions. So we've got, first of all, language points, imagery points, and verse form points, okay, because you should be talking about language, imagery, and verse form in your exam answer. So in terms of language, it might be interesting to look at the quote, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Okay, you've got obviously the use of the simile there, and it's quite a surprising use of language. You've got light being described as oppressive, cathedral tunes, you know, this juxtaposition of something very holy and spiritual with something very heavy and burdensome. So you've got a little bit of a juxtaposition there. In terms of imagery, you might want to talk about the, again, you know, juxtaposition here in terms of the comforting and the threatening. So you've got heavenly hurt, okay, so you've got this, again, godlike imagery, but juxtaposed with something rather more tied with suffering and something of threat. And then in terms of verse form, then we can, if we look back at the poem, if we look back in the book, we can see that typically we've got our 4-line stanzas. The light, and also the idea that the light appears in the first stanza. There's a certain slant of light, and then it comes back in the last stanza, if we see there. So you've got that reappearance of the light, and this could be interpreted as God's everlasting presence. Okay, so there we have at least 3 quotes there that might be interesting to talk about when you come to actually memorise the poem, these three quotations are certainly good ones to start with in terms of actually storing in your mind to pull out for the exam. Now, in terms of pulling out quotations, then obviously this will be really important for when you come to compare with other poems. Okay, so just going to quickly go through a few comparisons that came to my mind when I looked at the poem There's a Certain Slant of Light. Okay, so we've got, possibly you could compare to the poem Behind Me Dips Eternity. You could talk about the representation of heaven. That might be one point of comparison. You could also think about light in terms of something natural, a representation then of nature, so that brings to mind a bird came down the walk. There is a sense of oppressiveness and pain, like we talked about earlier, so an obvious one to talk about is potentially after a great pain, so we've got the pain there. And then in terms of comparing poems in relation to verse form, you might want to think the way that she does, obviously in this poem, use those 4-line stanzas, and there are just 4 stanzas there. That can be compared to the poem Because I Could Not Stop for Death, and you might interpret her use of that consistent 4-line stanzas to show her attempt to organise the chaos and anguish into something more manageable. Okay, so we're almost through with our 5-minute summary. Please spend some time now looking at any quotes that you would use for this poem. Also brainstorm some possible thesis statements as well. It would be a good idea to take note of those ideas, think about how you want to direct and guide your argument. Okay, and that is our 5 minutes up. Thank you for watching.